All right, welcome back to our video lecture. We're starting with chapters 2 through 6, looking at early civilizations. This is part 1B. We're focusing on the River Valley civilizations, and now we're looking at the Nile River Valley, which is, of course, the Egyptian civilization. And here we see the region of Egypt, right? The kingdom of Egypt. And notice that the land that the civilization where a lot of people live was near the Nile River, right? Because essentially, if you go about 20, 30 miles one way or another, one direction or another from the river, you're basically surrounded by desert. So all the existence, all the survival, all the people that lived in Egypt for thousands of years, and even to this day, they live very, very close to the Nile River. Now, Egypt has a very long history, and in AP World History, we don't really focus on it too much. Just understand that Egypt was very much safe, geographically speaking, because essentially you have, the Mediterranean Sea, you have the Red Sea, and you have two deserts, and you have mountains in the south. And the point is that unlike Mesopotamia, which is flat plains and no natural borders allowing anyone to come in, Egypt survived thousands of years uninterrupted, right? Ruled by the Egyptian rulers, by the pharaohs, and with very little um, conflicts with the outside world. Now the Nile River flows, throughout Northeast Africa, so Egypt is part of North Africa, geographically speaking, even though culturally we tie it up with the Middle East. And without the river, all of this would just be like one giant desert. No one can really live there. Now, along the river, people started growing different crops. The most important ones were wheat and barley, a lot of fruits and vegetables as well. And one unique one is called papyrus. And this is a plant, a reed that grows in the Nile River was used to make the first type of paper. So this was the first type of paper ever used. Now, the Egyptians, they they roughly started their civilization around the same time as Mesopotamia. But what we're going to see is that they are going to be much more organized, much more centralized, meaning that the pharaoh has very tight control over everything. And again, this is a result of the natural borders kind of isolating Egypt from any outsider conflicts. So they're not going to get invaded all too often compared to Mesopotamia will. Um, so we see large towns and cities being formed, just like we saw in Mesopotamia. We see the same developments of a civilization, like religious organization, the growth of division of the social classes. Same thing will happen which had to happen in Mesopotamia, will happen again in Egypt, and later on we'll see the same thing in India and in China. Now, the Mesopotamians, they were really good. I mean, the Egyptians, they like the Mesopotamians, had to worry about digging canals, digging dams, or constructing dams, because they had to control the flooding of the river. So even though they look forward to the river floods, you have to be able to manage it or control it in order so that you can irrigate your crops, right? Provide water for your crops, and that you can not drown. Now, basically, these are the five kind of like stages of the Egyptian history. At first, Egypt was very small. It was a few city-states that got united. The famous king there's called King Menes. Then we see the kind of like the long kingdom called the Old Kingdom, and that's when the pyramids were built, right? So all the pyramids that are super famous from Egypt, right? They're about 5,000 years old, right? That's during the Old Kingdom. Then we see the Middle Kingdom come in, and basically you have dynasties, right? These families of rulers who ruled Egypt for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And notice that the very few times that we see is of instability is when we see invaders, right? When people come in and invade one of the people known as the Hyksos, right? That came from Turkey, and they overthrew the Egyptians for a short while. And then eventually the last kingdom is called the New Kingdom, which is the largest of all of them. Right? They expanded their territory, but eventually they had religious problems, and that would lead to their eventual decline. They will get conquered by the Assyrians and then by the Babylonians and by a whole bunch of other empires after that. in Egypt, like Mesopotamia, will be part of, one small part of different empires. Now, for like I said, for throughout these kingdoms, Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms, right, we see the rulers of the Pharaoh, right? They are the rulers. We see that the pharaohs will claim to be descendants of gods and claim to be divine many times, that they are a god. And this religious authority combined with the political authority meant that they had absolute power and they could literally do whatever they wanted. And so they would build these giant temples, these giant statues, to honor them, their power and their greatness. Sometimes the power of the pharaoh kind of like overstepped their boundaries. One famous example is this pharaoh called Amenhotep, and basically he said that the Egyptians need to stop praying to many different gods because they were polytheistic, and instead he wanted everyone to pray to one god, and that God, of course, was himself. Right? He was the one singular, all-powerful God, and he wanted everyone to pray to him. And as soon as he died, the Egyptians went back to praying to their old gods. Any images of Amenhotep were like scratched off or erased because they didn't appreciate the fact that they were um, that they had to, that this pharaoh was trying to change their religion. uh, Egypt is going to have two pharaohs, two queens. Nefertiti is one of them, a very famous lady. She was a pharaoh. The other one is Cleopatra, right, who was famous during the time of the Romans. We'll talk more about her, even though she wasn't very popular amongst the Egyptians because she wasn't Egyptian. She was actually Greek. There's also Hatshepsut, who was also very successful because she expanded the empire during the New Kingdom through trade, right? Through trade and economic expansion and wealth. Probably the most famous and well known of the pharaohs is Tutankhamun, though he only lived a very short amount of time, about 17 or 18 years old. And the reason we know so much about him was because his tomb, that you see here, his tomb was preserved for thousands of years until it was eventually discovered about 100 years ago. All right, so we have Egypt up here, right? This is the Nile River right through the middle. But below Egypt, right, in what we nowadays we call Sudan or South Sudan and North Sudan, the Nile River continues, right? It goes through all this region. So different civilizations and cities also were established here, and this region is known as Nubia. And through Nubia, we see a connection between North Africa, which is Egypt, and Sub-Saharan Africa, right, which is the rest of Africa. And these kingdoms will interact quite a bit, right? So here we have Egypt, there's Sudan, and so from Egypt they were able to trade and connect stuff with the rest of the southern parts of Africa, the central parts of Africa. Sudan or Nubia played that role as kind of like a link in between Egypt and the rest of the African continent. Now, the relationship between the Nubians and the Egyptians changed over hundreds and hundreds of years. Most of the times they were at war. Sometimes they were trading quite a lot. And through this interaction between Egypt and Nubia, we see a lot of we call it cultural transfusion, meaning that the Nubians adopted and learned from the Egyptians. And so, for example, we see that the Nubians built pyramids for their kings. And of course, these pyramids are nowhere near the size as the Egyptian ones, but it shows us that they believed, similar to the Egyptians, in the importance of these pyramids and these tombs. We also see that the Nubians followed and prayed to very similar to the Egyptian gods. And at one point, Nubians actually conquered Egypt and they had pharaohs. Now, the Nubians were darker skinned than the Egyptians, so there are pictures of Egyptian pharaohs who are very dark skinned. And that was during the time when the Nubians ruled over Egypt. So these two territories, these two regions were constantly interacting with each other, and we see kind of like a lot of similarities between them. And here we see some of those or the ruins of the Nubian pyramids. They're nowhere near as large and or as well constructed, and that's why they haven't survived the test of time as much as the Egyptian ones have. Right, here we see other pictures. Right, you see them being worn down. They're very small, much smaller than the Egyptian ones. Now, the Egyptians, they love going to Nubia to buy exotic goods, gold, ivory, right, which is what we call it, comes from elephant tusks. They were looking for incense, right, aromatic sticks and wood that you burn and make your house smell nice. They're also looking for animal skins, like leopards and cheetahs and lions, and also slaves. They were looking for slaves. And the Egyptians, just like the Nubians, they wrote in hieroglyphs. And eventually, the region of the kingdom of Nubia will collapse and will be replaced by another one called Kush. And here we see some of those again pyramids. The Kushites, they would fight and sometimes they would trade with Egypt, just like the Nubians before them. And like many other civilizations, what we see is that the Kushites, as their population expanded, they will cut down their trees, their forests more and more to make room for cropland, farmland, and eventually their population were had to like flee because the land became unsustainable. Right? They couldn't really live off the land anymore. And just like the Nubians, they also exported, luxury goods like slave and ivory and gold, and they themselves would get conquered by another kingdom called Aksum. Right? And Aksum, so here we see Kush, right? Their capital is Meroe. Egypt will be up here, and the Kushites will be conquered by the Aksumites. And Aksum will last for much longer time than any of the other ones. And what is going to be very unique about the Aksum people is that they will adopt Christianity eventually. And even to this day, the people of that region, right, the people of the region that we now call Ethiopia, many of them are still Christians from a very long time ago. So Aksum was very wealthy for a while, for a long time, I should say, because of trade, right? So they notice here that they would trade on the Red Sea, they would trade what would be the Indian Ocean over here, and of course they would trade with Egypt along the Nile River. All right, so that's it for part two, looking at Egypt. I'll see you back for part C when we look at the Indus Valley in South Asia.